Oh, hi, welcome back. Do a little bit of that. What is up, everybody? Welcome back. This is Bunny Hernandez in lovely Los Angeles, California. Today we are going to talk about the SEC, the ETH thing. We're also going to talk about Goldman Sachs opening up a Bitcoin trading unit and what steps the New York Stock Exchange is also taking to get into that Bitcoin action, and why these sort of larger institutional players and regulatory entities, why they might be important for you, just in case you happen to be just a regular person or a regular day trader like myself, or someone who's like a crypto nerd, as my buddy JD over at Stactical calls himself. So let's get started. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about the SEC and the CFTC talking about ETH and whether or not they made a determination on ETH being a security. So according to stuff that I've read on Medium, and I went through a couple of Reddit threads, and I looked at the Wall Street Journal article, some people report that a rumor started based on a Wall Street Journal article. The Wall Street Journal article stipulated that the SEC and the CFTC were going to get together and talk about crypto. Now, they didn't specifically say that the meeting was going to result in an actual determination about ETH. The Wall Street Journal article did not stipulate that the SEC at all were going to actually make a determination as to whether or not ETH is a security at the end of that meeting. Yet somehow out in Twitter sphere or crypto sphere or interwebs sphere, this information turned into false information, essentially the misinformation that the SEC and the CFTC were going to be meeting to determine whether or not ETH was a security. So that information is false. The SEC and the CFTC did meet, but they did not meet in order to determine whether or not ETH was a security. They met as a working group behind closed doors, which means that a working group is basically when entities or researchers or whomever are having an ongoing conversation about a topic at hand, and they get together in a way that enables them to ask questions and to discuss the research that they've done, perhaps present some findings, and basically continue that conversation about whatever the topic is. So this topic is crypto, obviously, and not necessarily per se strictly ETH. So this also comes at a time where Goldman Sachs is reported by the New York Times to open a Bitcoin trading unit in the coming weeks. And that's really, really interesting news, because Goldman Sachs would be one of the first Wall Street entities of its kind to open a Bitcoin trading unit when it does, which is massive. So the decision to start trading Bitcoin was actually made by the board of directors over at Goldman Sachs. They're already operating as a clearinghouse for the CME and the CBOE. So they're going to offer their own version of Bitcoin futures to their clients. In addition to offering their own Bitcoin futures, they're going to offer their own version of a Bitcoin future, a more flexible version, which is called a non-deliverable forward. They've hired their first digital asset trader, who's Justin Schmidt, as the New York Times reported. He'll be overseeing operations of this Bitcoin trading unit, and he was hired about 2 weeks ago. So one question that the Bitcoin community might have, and of course there will be very variegated opinions across the board, is it a good thing to have an institutional player like Goldman Sachs come into the crypto space? You know, from my perspective, I think more money coming into our space, more money coming into crypto will basically bode well for crypto over the long term. And the reason why I think that is because it's a very simple reason. So the more institutional money that comes into crypto, the higher the valuation of a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin will be. Now, of course, there are all sorts of factors that might hinder that actually being the case. But from a very macro, very logical standpoint, that will probably end up happening. The more institutional money you have coming in, the higher the valuation of Bitcoin specifically will be. So that's reason number one as to why I think institutional players entering into this space is a good thing, or at least not a bad thing. The second reason as well is the more institutional players we have coming into the space, the more it will open up crypto as to a mainstream audience. So currently right now, we're still in those early days. It's still early adopter phase. And by and large, most of the people that I interact with on a daily basis have obviously heard of cryptocurrency and have heard of the legacy cryptocurrency, which is Bitcoin, but perhaps they don't own any yet. So an institutional player like Goldman Sachs coming in and setting up its own Bitcoin trading unit will improve sentiment around cryptocurrency as a legitimate asset, if anything, at least a legitimate asset, albeit a digital asset, which I don't have a problem with calling it digital. And as well, in addition to improving sentiment around cryptocurrencies in general, it will also increase collective consciousness, collective awareness about cryptocurrency at large, and as well specifically Bitcoin. So I do applaud institutional players like Goldman Sachs coming in, sort of spearheading the way into this space. I do applaud Goldman Sachs for pioneering the way into crypto as an institutional player from traditional Wall Street. Two questions do remain though, and the first question is what sort of custody solutions Goldman Sachs is going to offer its clients. So we all know that Bitcoin itself is so far unhackable, right? Demonstratedly unhackable. Now, we also know that exchanges, if anything, are very hackable. Exchanges within crypto, exchanges within traditional markets, and not only exchanges, but anytime you have centralized databases, Equifax, Uber, Facebook, whatever, every time you have information stored in a central silo in one place, that's basically a big honeypot of data. And if you're a hacker, you might see it as an opportunity. So the question of custody remains for Goldman Sachs. If it's going to be bringing in all of this institutional money and it will be buying and selling Bitcoin, where and in what capacity will it keep the Bitcoin that it does have? If it keeps it in cold storage, then the problem is being able to move it very quickly. If it doesn't keep it in cold storage and it keeps it hot and live, then basically if it's centralized, hackers will see an opportunity to, guess what? Get some of that honey from the honey pot. So the question of custody remains. It's a question that as well is a question for the entire crypto space. As we all know, custody so far is one of the biggest challenges to onboarding and on-ramping new users into the space. And the second issue of concern is, and it's just an open question that I have so far, is the introduction of institutional players into the space. I want to see how that's going to play out with regulation in general. So will the introduction of institutional investors into the space require more and more regulation that's coming from outside of crypto in general? Or will institutional players moving into the space somehow sort of adapt to the self-governance, essentially, the self-governing methods that crypto sort of champions but still hasn't totally figured out yet. It seems unlikely that institutional players will become adaptive to the crypto system or the crypto framework of doing things. So I think it's going to be interesting to see the way in which regulation really plays out and tries to grapple with crypto as more and more institutional players come into our space. Not that it's like a division thing. So to add to the fact that Goldman Sachs is opening its trading unit, I also mentioned that the New York Stock Exchange is opening up something as well. And that's being led by the parent company of the New York Stock Exchange, which is called the Intercontinental Exchange. And they are also moving forward in building out a Bitcoin trading platform. So let's keep our ears open and see how that progresses moving forward. Awesome. Don't forget to hit that like button. Don't forget to click subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.